sort of like the logistics counterpart of the Sarbanes-Oxley. It's causing a great deal of anxiety and so forth in the ports. Boo and I had a meeting with the people from the ports of Miami a few months ago. And they're almost ready to go out of business. They are getting so many, one regulation, another regulation, they're getting priced out of the market. They can't compete with other ports around. And even Florida seems to have, for some reason, Florida has more regulations than other states. And Port of Miami is really hurting. Next. So there's this U.S., so as in EDI, there's a U.S. initiative and then there's an international initiative. This is the U.S. initiative, the Container Security Initiative. Next. Keep going. No, before you go back one. This Container Security Program involves the screening of containers that pose a risk for terrorism. And it's accomplished by teams from the Customs and Border Protection officials deployed outside to work in concert with their host nation counterparts. And I've underlined that. Look to see if your country is on this list. Whatever country you've got here on this plan. And just keep that in mind as we go a little bit further on. Next. This is the international version. It's called the SHIP, the SPFSC, something like that, the Ship and Port Facility, SPSC, Ship and Port Facility Security Code, okay? And again, it's a series of regulations. The idea is they're going to detect security threats and implement security measures. Point that I'm bringing home here is that these are regulations that are costly. And they're being imposed on ports and ports of entry, logistic entry points for particularly this country, but any country dealing with this country. Okay. So here's the trade-off I'm trying to bring up. And this is going to be the focus of the proposal that we're working on. We're trying to work on some notion of harmonization between the various parties. So security is not just what you do at one port. Security involves collaboration with other ports. So as I mentioned, the Port of Miami is having serious anxieties. Next. Some of the issues. This top one is really key. Detecting when it's a legitimate trade versus something potentially wrong. Governments, international organizations, business community work together to minimize the cost of security and make international trading systems safer. You see a trade-off. Okay. Next. Okay. So this is the thing I showed you earlier. I'm going to sort of flip through. What's coming in the next few slides is technology that we've developed over the past few years. It's sort of the starting point for this future proposal. Networking between ports to support security. Go ahead. So what we're trying to do is provide a modernization path. What we're trying to keep in mind here, it's the big ports, Hong Kong, Rotterdam, Singapore, they're way ahead of the curve. It's the little ports. But little ports have valid security problems. Go ahead. Next. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. This is sort of like the flow that I showed before. Go ahead. This is an example of the model that we've developed so far. of how you could have a single model. Right now, all the parties sort of figure it out on their own. You can have a single coordinated model that downloads to each of the parties. You have to click it several times. Go ahead. So each party downloads. Go ahead. Quickly. In the technology we've developed, this go back. Oh no. Go forward. Go forward. Now what happened to the one before that? Back. Back. I don't want to click on it here because it'll go back. Each of these, they're really tiny. You see them as a graph. This is a graphics user interface to design these, but these are also computer programs. These are in a representation we developed. It's called a documentary Petronet. And the point is that these are essentially 5 independent computer programs that coordinate only on documents. And they work concurrently to control the flow of the trade. So this is a 5-party trade, not a 40-party trade. We have models for the bigger ones too. But the idea is you can have a centralized designer that designs these complex, you can have put in the best lawyers and so forth to design this once, and to have a model that then can be downloaded to the various parties and essentially execute automatically. And then you can put all the analysis in at the top end.
So you mean that you have one form, and then once the shipper has it, you fill out this part, and the form is
Yeah, let's go ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
they fill out their part, and then they...
I don't expect you to be able to read this from...
Oh, it's gonna read
But this one is about standardization rather than harmonization. When you make the standard procedure and assume that everyone uses the same procedure. But real world is very different. You maybe have a little different procedure, the other one maybe have a little different procedure, even though they do the same task.
This is this example, this is kind of a middle-sized example that we use to illustrate. This is called documentary credits. And this is, those of you that know it will realize that this is simplified, but it sort of captures the essence. A documentary credit, not too fast, begins with a contract between the buyer and the seller. The problem is, and this has been a long time problem in international trade, that ship takes a week. In the past it used to take a month to get from one side to the other. The shipper wants to be paid immediately, but the buyer, the consignee, doesn't want to pay until the goods arrive. So what they do is they get a loan called the documentary credit from some bank. And the bank essentially covers the amount of the trade while the goods are in transit. It's called documentary because the bank never sees the goods. The bank is doing all this based only on paper. And here's where the deontic part comes back. That this paper is very much like a title document. The bill of lading is typically one of the key documents that's involved here. There's other documents, certificate of origin. Depending on the terms of the credit, there can be a whole number of documents involved. So this is a rich example for us to work on. It's also publicly very well documented. There's the International Chamber of Commerce has got a whole book of about 150 pages explaining this transaction. It starts off with typically, there's many variations, but typically the consignee issues a credit application